Welcome! If this is your first time joining us, click on the link at the top for some helpful tips with these lessons. Then, feel free to come back here and join us. We're headed to a new book, 1 Samuel, where we'll bridge Israel's time of judges to the time of kings. This unit's focus will be God's chosen and what that looks like in each lesson. Our first lesson begins with Samuel himself, and that God's chosen listen. Before we dive in today's lesson, let's first take a look at the book of 1 Samuel. Again, 1 Samuel comes directly after Ruth, which took place at the end of Judges. The continuation of 1 Samuel is 2 Samuel, with 1 Chronicles paralleling. It's the 9th book of the Bible, and was written around 900 BC, mainly by Samuel, as well as Nathan, Gad, and another unknown scribe. It takes place from 1150 BC and 1000 BC, which overlaps with some of Ruth's story. 1 Samuel bridges the time in Israel of the judges to the time of kings. And we really start to see Israel as a unified nation. We'll learn about Israel's greatest judge as well as Israel's greatest king in 1 Samuel. Why were they the greatest? Why were they chosen? We'll learn this and more starting now.
Object lesson!
Each week, I like to start out the lesson with a tangible example of God's truths. Sometimes it's these lessons that really make it easier to understand. In today's object lesson, we'll learn about a mysterious creature that has an impeccable quality. Do you know what this is? Oh, well, yeah, it's a dog. Okay, so that was a pretty easy question. We're pretty familiar with dogs and their behavior. They are furry, they walk on all fours, and they make this sound. And they make this sound. But you know, there's something really special about dogs. They have a relationship with humans unlike any other animals. Whether they are just a furry friend or a guide dog, or even on a police task force. There's a reason why we develop such strong bonds with them. And I'll give you a hint. They're great listeners. They could be lying around, frolicking in a field, or looking at a window checking out that crazy cat across the street. But as soon as their master calls their name, they immediately stop what they're doing and they wait for instructions. Is it a treat? Maybe an important mission, or maybe, yay, another round of fetch. Regardless, they show their love and respect just by listening. Obeying is another story. Today we'll learn about how important it is just to listen out for God. Because God's chosen, listen. And maybe God is choosing you. We'll be taking our lesson today from 1 Samuel chapters 1 through 3. Can you open your Bible with me to 1 Samuel? Great job finding our new book. During the end of Samson's time as judge of Israel, something was being done behind the scenes by God. God is always ahead of us, knowing what's to come and what's needed. You see, after Samson, Israel would soon be wicked once again. His people were divided, each in their own tribe, and every man did that which was right in his own eyes. God chose someone to unite them and to lead them. Let's learn today how his story began. It began with a man named Elkanah of Ephraim. He had 2 wives. Even though this was common in the Old Testament, mostly to strengthen their name, status, and heritage, it was not a part of God's intention for marriage. One wife, Peninnah, had children. The other, Hannah, had none. Each year, Elkanah and his family would make the trip from Ramah to Shiloh, where the tabernacle was, to worship and offer sacrifices to the Lord. The priest Eli was there, as well as his 2 sons, also priests. When Elkanah would make an offering, he always gave more to Hannah because he loved her very much, even though she was unable to have children. But Peninnah would give her such a hard time. She'd make Hannah feel miserable about not having children. This hurt Hannah so much. After all, not being able to have children back then was treated like a failure. One day, Hannah began crying, and Elkanah tried to comfort her, but there was nothing he could do. So she went out to the temple to pray, broken-hearted. Instead of being rude to Peninnah or giving up, she went to God, baring her heart and soul to him. Lord, I am your servant. Remember me. Please let me have a son. If you do, I will give him to you for as long as he lives, and his hair will never be cut. Her vow showed just how desperate she was to have a child. She continued praying to God for a long time, moving her mouth, but praying in her heart. Eli, the priest, had been watching her. Even he didn't understand her. He approached her and thought that she had been drunk. She explained to him that she had not been drinking, but was just very upset and had been pouring her soul out to the Lord. Eli now understood and encouraged her. Go in peace, and the God of Israel will answer your prayer. She thanked him and left, feeling much better. They all got up early the next day, worshiped God, and went back home to Ramah. Later, God had indeed answered Hannah's prayer. She had a boy and named him Samuel, meaning asked of God. She recognized that God had given her what she had asked him. Would she uphold her end of the vow? For 3 years, Hannah kept Samuel home from traveling with her husband to the feast in Shiloh. But when he was 3 years old, it was time. She took him and 3 other items to the tabernacle at Shiloh. She brought an animal sacrifice for the forgiveness of sins, some flour for praise and thanksgiving, and wine for dedication. However, the greatest sacrifice she gave God that day was her son Samuel. She brought him to Eli, the priest, and said, "A few years ago I stood here beside you and asked the Lord to give me a child. For this child I prayed, and the Lord gave me just what I asked for. Now I am giving him to the Lord, and he will be the Lord's servant for as long as he lives." Hannah had followed through on her promise and dedicated Samuel's life to God. Hannah prayed and rejoiced in the Lord for his sovereignty and his blessings. Perhaps she saw too at this time that Samuel was God's chosen. So Elkanah and Hannah went back to Ramah, and Samuel stayed to help Eli serve the Lord. Even at a young age, Samuel ministered before the Lord. Samuel wore a special linen garment called an ephod, much like Eli's, that all priests wore. And Hannah would bring him new clothes to wear with it every year when they came to Shiloh. Eli blessed Samuel's parents and prayed that God would bless them with more children. And God did. They had 3 more sons and 2 daughters. God gave abundantly to Hannah, more than she could have ever asked or imagined. Samuel continued to grow, and people liked Samuel more and more. By this time, Eli, who we'll take a closer look at next week, was very old and nearly blind. One night, when they were both asleep, the Lord called out Samuel's name. "Here I am," as he ran to Eli. "What do you want?" Eli told him. "I didn't call you. Go back to sleep." Samuel did not yet recognize God's voice. It happened again. After the 3rd time of this happening, Eli finally recognized that it had been the Lord calling out to Samuel. Now, in this time, it was very unusual for God to speak directly and audibly to anyone. There were no prophets God used to share a message to Israel, but apparently God did indeed have a message, and for Samuel. Eli told him to go back to bed, and if he heard the voice again, to say, "Speak, Lord, I'm listening." And so Samuel went back to bed, and again the voice called out, "Samuel, Samuel." This time Samuel answered, "Speak, for I am listening." God revealed to Samuel that he was going to bring punishment to Eli and his family. Samuel was afraid to tell Eli the next day what God had told him, but Eli demanded. Samuel told him, and Eli said, "He is the Lord, and he will do what's right." So Samuel grew up, and the Lord was with him. He was known in all the land, and they knew that Samuel was truly the Lord's prophet. God would often appear to Samuel and tell him what to say. God certainly chose Samuel, but first he had to hear and listen to God. Samuel was listening, but were you? It's time to find out with our review questions. Number 1. What vow did Hannah make to God? She promised that if God gave her the son she so desired, she would dedicate his life to serve him. And they both kept their vow. Number 2. How old was Samuel when he was first brought to Eli to minister under him? 3 years old. Can you imagine? God can certainly use anyone. Last question, number 3. After waking him up one night, God began using Samuel as a prophet. What first did Samuel have to do? Listen! He woke up, heard the voice of God, and obediently told him that he was listening. God's chosen listen. Great job. Time to get out our map. As you can see, this is what Israel looked like in Samuel's time. The names in caps are the 12 tribes. Samuel's dad, Elkanah, was from the tribe Ephraim. All right, can you find the city that Samuel was born at? It starts with an R. Ramah, here it is. Good job. Let's do another one. When Samuel went to be with Eli, where did he go? It's not too much further. Just north. Yes, Shiloh. This was the focal point of Israel's worship. Fantastic eyes, too. This week's scripture memory comes from Acts 22:14. Then he, Ananias, said, "The God of our fathers has chosen you, that you should know his will and see the just one, and hear the voice of his mouth." When Paul was first chosen by God, one of his first instructions was to hear the voice of God. And Paul certainly did. God's chosen listen. Are you listening?
Craft time.
Sometimes God talks to us in a quiet, still voice. Today, we're making something that is a gentle reminder to take time to listen carefully to Him. We're going to be making wind chimes. I want you to search around your house for items that you can use. Some ideas are pasta, metal washers, beads, seashells, cans and can lids, keys, bottle caps, sticks, bells, buttons, and popsicle sticks. Take a listen to how some of these objects sound when they tap against each other. Like the sound? Use it. Just one type or a combination of 2 or 3. Have fun exploring and choosing your items, but as always, be sure to have adult permission and help where needed. I had my kids in their different age ranges and skill sets do various types of wind chimes using different types of materials. I was really excited to hear the different sounds they'd make. The construction will be generally the same. Something to hang the items on, something to hang the items with, and the items themselves.
At-home ideas.
Looking for some more Samuel fun this week? We've included some activities that you can do as a family. For even more activities, visit our website at www.newbeginning.navcog.org. you enjoyed this week's lesson. We loved having you join us, and we hope to see you for next week's.